Deputy Maureen O'Sullivan.
Okay.
Deputy Maureen O'Sullivan, thank you.
Thank you. Taoiseach, in the past when drugs were mentioned, they were generally synonymous with heroin and with Dublin's inner city. But that situation has changed drastically. And I think we can say that every city in this country, every town, and very many of our villages have been invaded by drugs. And those communities, the individuals and their families, have seen the devastating consequences of drugs. Now, I do acknowledge the progress that has been made since those days when the late Tony Gregory was a lone voice on the drugs issue. And we saw the establishment of the local drugs task forces, the national bodies that were set up, the national drug strategy. And there was funding for the projects and the special CE schemes, and also the setting up of cabs. So there certainly were very valid points made that money going to cabs from drug-related crime should have been directed towards those communities that were most affected by drugs. But there are outstanding issues, and I want to bring them out here this morning. And one is that in the National Drug Strategy, it's recognised the importance of an interagency approach, and that there would be attendance at meetings of people from various departments and agencies. Now, due to cuts, those agencies and departments are unable to meet those commitments, and I think that's a serious issue. There's another one in relation to the regional drugs task forces, that they were given major areas to cover, but without the necessary resources to do that. We are waiting over 2 years for appropriate legislation in relation to Zimos and other pills, because the Gardaí are helpless at the moment on that. And there are serious issues around dual diagnosis. People who are presenting with addiction, with a mental health issue, and also with a homeless issue. And they're going from one agency to the other and back again before those issues are being addressed. Now, part of the problem, I think, has been that this issue has tended to be the remit of a junior minister who also has a number of other concerns. And also, the issue has moved home. It started off years ago in the Department of the Taoiseach, it went to the Department of Tourism and Sport, it went to Community and Rural Affairs, and it's now with the Department of Health. So you can only draw the conclusion that drugs and these issues are very far down the list of priorities. So my question is, where are you in relation to this issue, and how serious a commitment are you giving to the National Drug Strategy? And I suggest in the answer you might look at the fact that the drugs projects have seen 38% cuts since 2008, and that you would consider, when these decisions are being made about ministers, if not a full ministerial role, that if there is a junior minister, that their remit would solely be drugs and not anything else.
Taoiseach.
Yeah. The minister's thing is a bit like the loaves and fishes, Deputy Sullivan. No matter what you do, you're not going to have enough. The issue that you raise is very important, and I commend all of those agencies and organisations working along with Gardaí and CAB in terms of the business of being able to detect and intercept and deal with those who are in the business of drug dealing, provision of drugs. And on the other side of that argument, the agencies and organisations who work with those who have to suffer the consequences of drug addiction, drug use and drug abuse. I know you mentioned the homeless issue, and Minister Sullivan here attended at a Cabinet subcommittee on Monday. And there was an intensive response from, in particular, Dublin City Council here about the homeless issue, and I can give Deputy Sullivan the details of that. I don't have all of the details of the facts and figures of the agencies that you mentioned there, but I do think that, irrespective of cutbacks, it's been possible for agencies and for departmental staff to attend at the meetings where decisions are made here. You mentioned cutbacks of 38% in some areas. I suggest, Deputy Sullivan, if you give me the details of what you're actually presenting here, we will have this discussed through the next meeting of the Cabinet Subcommittee, which deals specifically with this, both in terms of the National Drug Strategy, the local organisations and agencies dealing with drugs and the consequences of them, and see if we can make an impact. Taking into account some of the issues that you raise. So perhaps you might give me that information after the Dáil, Deputy.
Deputy O'Sullivan.
I want to make one other point, and it is that alcohol is now being integrated within the remit of the National Substance Misuse Strategy. Now, many of us would think that it should have been there all along, and we do know recent reports about this country's very unhealthy relationship with alcohol and the costs. But the task forces with shrinking budgets have now to take on the alcohol initiative as well. Now, I know everybody is at risk of drug abuse, but there is a proven link between disadvantage and drug abuse, and that disadvantaged communities are more likely to be exposed to drugs. And we do see the inequalities there. We see inequality in access to rehab, for example, and for some people in those communities, the CE special scheme are their only rehabilitation. We see the most recent figures on drug-related deaths. Now, there are reasons why it's 2010 to 2011. There was an 8% increase nationally, a 50% increase in the Dublin area. And my last point before I come to my next question is in relation to young people. And myself and my constituency colleagues over there, we've seen children as young as 10 dabbling in drugs. We've seen children of that age being used by the dealers as runners and as lookouts. Now, there has been funding towards the youth projects and through the Young People's Facilities and Services Fund, but there is a need for a constant monitoring of that fund, that it goes to where it is directed. And it was directed, when it was set up back in 1999, at those children who are most at risk of drugs. So can we see a commitment to that funding continuing also?
Taoiseach.
Yes, this matter has been raised with me by Deputy Byrne on this side of the House on a number of occasions about young children having access and, as you say, dabbling with drugs, and obviously the consequences of all of that. This is a social issue of enormous consequences, Deputy Sullivan, and clearly the figures that you mentioned, both in terms of those who die and get into so much difficulty from a health point of view, from a psychological point of view, speak for themselves. It is a case of trying to catch up in many cases, but trying to prevent in so many others. So on the higher end of it, with the CAB and the drug squad and the national drug strategy of attempting to have this country as clean as is possible from use and abuse of drugs, and in particular areas like some where you've referred to, the problem is very acute. I'll give you that commitment, that you supply me with the details of what you're talking about. We'll take it up through the specific committee that will deal with it.
Thank you. That completes the leader's questions for today.